So I add my thanks, of course, to PJ, who and the board and everybody who, during a very difficult year, to say the least, I was supposed to be down here basically a year ago, April, for what was supposed to be our first one of these, and then, of course, events interfered. So PJ, thank you so much. Thank you all for getting something going at the most difficult time. And geez, I'm speechless. I have there's nothing I can say about Dr. Seuss. I mean, you never know what you're going to be faced with. I never knew I was going to have to. So I have nothing to add to Dr. Seuss, actually. We can all go home right now if you want.
For you.
Oh, wait a minute. I do have something to add. For better or worse.
Woody, do you speak for the trees?
Do I speak for the trees? That's an impossible question to answer. No, maybe it's easy. No, I do not. I speak for me and for us, hopefully, for some of us. So anyway, thank you all for coming. This is, a kind of an auspicious little thing for me and for us, only because this book came off the press on we picked it up on Friday at the printer. And as fate would have it, on Friday we also went live with our new Bitcoin.org site. Now, if there's any confusion in your mind, did I say Bitcoin incorrectly? The answer is no. It's Bitcoin, like the vegetable, and Bitcoin.org is a thing, and technically we launched it on Friday. There was a little placeholder site before because it's mentioned in the book quite often, and some of you may have seen installments of the book online during last winter and fall, and I was actually kind of surprised. I was hoping we might be able to avoid publishing the book in print and just give it away online, and a lot of people said it's too much reading online, we really want a book. So I'm very glad we now have a book, and I hope some of you will get it. And whoops, I don't need that. And that said, it is still available free online by installments. And on the new Bitcoin.org site, you can go on there and buy the book, or you can just get all the installments free. What we want is to get the message out there, any which way we can. So thank you all for coming. So I'm going to most of this is going to be a book reading, and then discussion after. But I just thought I'd say a few things before I start reading. Some of you know, so I wrote a book called Inquiries into the Nature of Slow Money. The subtitle is Investing as if Food, Farms, and Fertility Mattered. That was written in like 2006, 7, 8, and was published at the end of December 2008. And I wasn't intending that it turn into an action necessarily. I was just trying, after 30 years in finance and philanthropy and different things, to collect my thoughts. And the impulse behind writing the book was, why aren't we as a wealthy society able to put our money to work in things that we say we want, but we can't quite get the money there as individuals? The money just keeps getting sucked into Wall Street and derivatives and all kinds of other stuff. And it became obvious while I was writing the book. I was sharing it with friends and whatnot, and it kind of became obvious while I was writing it that something might happen, but then something did happen. So here we are, now we're 10 or 11 years later. $80 million has gone into, these are kind of macro numbers. $80 million has gone into over 800 small food enterprises, local farms, farm-to-table restaurants, seed companies. And thank you for that applause. And it's not nearly enough because, as we all know, I mean, there's lots of ways of saying it isn't enough, and some of those will be reflected. You'll hear a bunch about that in the passages I read. But particularly this decade, it seems to me, this decade coming up. So I kind of generally think of it as the decade of Greta, but, it's all different ways of saying the same thing. We really need to, if there's any possible way we can pull the rabbit out of the hat, this is the decade we have to try to do it. And I guess the consistent message through my 3 books, so I have the first book, and then I have the middle book, which is the one I wrote in 2016 and 17, called SOIL, Notes Towards the Theory and Practice of Nurture Capital. And that is the book that I wrote when this idea of what many of you here are already doing, meaning creating local groups to make 0% loans to farmers, that idea emerged during the course of the first decade of slow money. So of that $80 million, I should clarify this, about 78.5 million of the 80 million did not go in 0% loans. It went in low interest loans, way below market, often without collateral. They're still very concessionary, but We didn't have the idea of doing 0% loans collectively until the last several years. We started a group Boulder, there's one in Carbondale, there's a small one in Durango too. You guys are the most rural group that is trying to do this, and I think maybe in the Q&A at the end when we talk about whatever you want to talk about, we can talk about the challenges of doing it in a group where you're further apart. It's hard to come together physically frequently. There may be less people. How do you get to critical mass and sustain this? The idea of these groups is that if people keep donating every year and you get enough people and you make the 0% loans, of course you're going to lose a few of the loans, but the vast majority you're going to pay back. And you keep doing that for a generation, slow money, generation or two. Even though we feel the urgency, we have to still think long term and start something. Talking about trees, you know that the old Chinese thing about the best time to plant a tree was 50 years ago. The second best time is today. So this is what we're doing. We got to think long term, feel the urgency, but still act, long term. So if you keep doing this for a few generations, it'll be millions of dollars, and you will have involved hundreds or thousands of people in each community. So that's the vision. And the Bitcoin site, which maybe I'll say more about after I do the reading, but hopefully you will all go home and go to bitcoin.org. I'm serious, I hope you will. And I think PJ is going to send out a reminder tomorrow about that. You will see a vision of a crowdfunding campaign, which we hope will have a long life, and will aggregate small donations online from people all over the world, and we will use them to start and grow soil groups all over the place. So we'll be using, hopefully, the power of the internet alongside the power, but all local decision making. In other words, the local groups will make all the decisions about where the loans go, and then the money will stay local once it gets down into the local groups. So I see some nodding heads, which is vaguely reassuring. Oh, wait, are you falling asleep or are you nodding in assent? I don't know. I can't see. There's a lot of glare here. I can't see that well. All right. So what else? I think that's, sometimes I get, people ask me how I got into this. So I'll just say, you might find some of these ideas are fairly far-reaching, I guess you'd say. They're historical. They take a really broad view of things. And some of them are very, very conversational, anecdotal. They just reflect conversations I've had around the country. And I tried to hold it all together, and that's why this is a notebook, meaning it's a working document of, and it does reflect, you'll hear some notes I took of conversations, so you have to be careful what you say to me, because it might end up in a book. So how did I end up doing this? I've had enough of a career. You can tell I'm a little at the end of my career. But along the way, I did angel investing and was treasurer of a foundation for 10 years in New York, and was generally considered one of the pioneers of something called mission-related investing, which is foundations using their assets in a way which is consistent with the grants. I know that may sound a little abstract, but if I tell you that there are healthcare foundations who are invested in tobacco stocks, and you go, how in the world could that possibly be? Or healthcare foundations that are invested in oil companies in Nigeria, and they're giving grants to the villages in Nigeria that are impacted by the oil companies in which they're invested. I just won't say the name of that foundation just so I can not be considered a flamethrower, because I'm not a flamethrower. But the point is, we have this horrible dissonance going on where the money is sitting in one place, and then we take little crumbs of it, and we try to fix the things that were created by the investments. That's the big problem. That's the big problem. So let's say I hope it'll be clear from what I'm reading tonight that I've had just enough experience in all those things to be trouble, and come up with some ideas. And someone did once say to me, before the first book was written, I've been kind of mulling, kind of scribbling stuff my whole life. Before the first book was written, I had shared some documents with some of the precursor writing, and he happens to be a member of one of the wealthiest families in the United States, which, does that mean something? It just means he's around money a lot. And he put the thing down on the coffee table and he said, do you know what your message is, your true message? I said, I don't know, what is it? He said, don't be afraid, an alternative is possible. And I honestly, when he said it to me, I'll never forget, this is about 15 years ago, I had no idea what he was talking about. I mean, I really didn't. I thought I was writing about like angel investing and philanthropy, and like he was going to say something about the details. And that's what he said. So now here we are. I'll start reading in a second. I think these books are kind of a statement of an alternative. And it's not like an alternative like we're going to throw everything else out. It's a complement. It's something we need in addition to globalization, in addition to Wall Street cleverness, in addition to technological cleverness. And I suppose, at the risk of maybe spoiling the fun when I read this, I'll just say, the aha is several things. There's like a big aha, like a really big aha that I hope we're all headed towards as a species, that it's not just about cleverness and manipulation and power and efficiency, that we need to take care of each other and that we can take care of each other in a whole different way. That's like the big aha. Then there's a lot of little ahas that we all have in our own lives as we kind of head towards the big aha. And so you'll hear kind of, and I guess I'd say that big aha is an alternative is possible. And this is the alternative. We just have to keep doing it. So, okay, that's more than enough by way of introduction. And then after, we'll spend a few minutes talking. We can talk about anything I read or anything about Bitcoin or about doing, the mechanics of doing a soil group. Oh, and I want to call out Tana Schultz, who's here. Some of you met her. Tana, say hi. So Tana is on the board of my national board. She's on the board of the Slow Money group, of the SOIL group in Boulder, and is a super volunteer. Like, we wouldn't be anywhere without her. So Tana, thank you so much for everything. All right. So now I've got about 23 and a half minutes, according to our timing, of just sections of the book. Now, they're not contiguous, you know what I mean? So I'm just going to read and I'm going to flip pages. Just kind of go with the flow. Don't worry about the exact connectors. And hopefully a pattern will emerge. So this is the first page. In 1970, Alvin Toffler wrote the bestseller Future Shock, heralding an era of unprecedented innovation and acceleration. We couldn't quite know how right he was, although the resonance of his message seemed ineluctable. Now, on the back end of 50 years of just that, unprecedented innovation and acceleration in every sphere of life, we're trying to find our way from the age of ones and zeros to whatever comes next. What comes after future shock? Shock of pandemic, shock of supply chain, climate shock, cyber shock, actual shock and virtual shock, shock of billions and trillions, shock of us and shock of them. Shock that after all that future shock, fear, hatred, and vilification are shockingly stubborn. We are called to a new era of pragmatism at the level of household, community, and bioregion, pushed by the immediacy of crisis and pulled by the long-term need for systemic change. We are called to a new era of peacemaking at the level of, well, that's where poetic possibility and lively seriousness come in, the place where sapience flirts not only with disaster, but also with philia. I will explain philia shortly. The arcs of population, consumerism, militarism, industrialism, urbanism, technological adventurism, racism, and economic growth are exceedingly difficult to bend. At the level of institutions and systems, almost impossible to bend. What if, in addition to efforts to bend the practically unbendable at the level of institutions and systems, we were to put more effort into mending the eminently mendable at the level of foodshed and watershed? The thing is, we were shutting down long before the pandemic-induced shutdown. Oh, by the way, I should just add, this prologue was written after most of this notebook was put together, and it happened to be April 2020 is the date on the prologue, so it's very about the pandemic had just, so just keep that in mind a little bit. So we were shutting down long before the pandemic-induced shutdown. We were shutting down small towns. We were shutting down small farms. We were shutting down local newspapers. We were shutting down diversity. We were shutting down culture in the name of commerce. We were shutting down trust. We were shutting down home and hearth in favor of fast food. We were shutting down here in favor of everywhere and nowhere. We were shutting down the real in favor of the fake. Now may or may not be the moment to open up this part or that part of the economy, but it is definitely the moment to do what we can to begin making sure this time is different, which means opening our hearts and minds to a whole new vision of nurture, culture, and cultivation. By the way, you can tell this is the first time I've read from this book in public because I didn't even say what the title was. So this might be the moment to say, it's aha, the subtitle is Fake Trillions, Real Billions, Beatcoin, and the Great American Do-Over. So the theme of fake and real is woven through the book. The prologue ends thus. Those of us of a certain age were of a certain other age in the 60s and 70s, and I see some of you here. I should say some of us here. When Think Global, Act Local became a meme before we knew what memes were. Today we're all getting our comeuppance from fires in the Amazon and Australia, and a few other places. From viruses of pandemic and populism. From Greta. There's a hole in our hearts and in the heart of capitalism and in the culture of consumerism and investorism. It's a hole of mythic proportions. It cannot be healed by ultra-fast trading or the empty calories of stale dogma, but it can be healed. Chapter 1. Aha. I guess Dr. Seuss wasn't that far off, actually. I just have too many words in here. Anyway, that's my fate. Aha. You don't have an aha moment. An aha moment has you. And we are all about to be had. About to be had by the greatest, humblest, noblest, messiest, most meaningful aha of all time. But not just yet. At this moment, we are being overwhelmed, bombarded, and dumbfounded by virus and meme, ideology and tribal antipathy, assertion and allegation, fear-mongering and scapegoating, punditry and polarization, data and disinformation, fakery and wakery. Things are rough and tumble here as the world keeps heating up, on the cusp of post-industrial and pre-whatever comes next. This is what it feels like in the run-up to an awakening worthy of the species that gave itself the name Homo sapiens. The ancient Greeks distinguished between several kinds of love. The two I learned about in school were eros, for erotic love, and agape, for universal love or altruism. They had others as well, including philia, for friendship and affection. E.O. Wilson's term biophilia is defined as the innate affection humans have for all living things. Wendell Berry's concept of affection ties us to one another and to the land. Yet, as surely as the value of a living tree is one thing, and the price of a pallet of 2x4 is another, economics has had a remarkably easy time, a distressingly easy time, trumping biophilia and affection. That's why small diversified organic farms are so vital. They are repositories of radical affection, generating and regenerating working relationships between economics and ecology at a comprehensible scale. What they contribute to society goes far beyond the nutrient-dense food they produce and the carbon their soil sequesters. Small and mid-sized organic farmers are essential workers in the long emergency, well, no longer as long as we once thought, of climate change, toxics, fast food, the substitution of the lowest common denominator for the common good, fast money, and the spiritual crises of a culture that has cut itself off from the land, slicing and dicing the whole into myriad pieces. Now I bollocksed myself up here. Hang on. I've been thinking about what you're saying, said someone in the audience at the 20th annual meeting of the Sustainable Farming Association of Minnesota. You're saying that I'd be getting a loan from my neighbors, but I don't like some of my neighbors. A wave of laughter swept the room. There were about 300, mostly farmers in the room. It was a big event. You're right, I replied. Transactions are one thing, relationships another. A whole other layer of relationships have to be taken into account. It's going to seem difficult at the start. Hold on, how many of you are farming because it's easy? Oh, a much stronger wave of laughter. Who told you investing was supposed to be easy? We have the results of easy investing all around us. Strip malls and smokestacks in China and climate change. We're giving our money to people we don't know very well so they can invest in things they don't understand very well in places most of us will never visit. That's easy investing. The kind of investing we need, investing that connects us to one another in the places where we live, won't be easy at first. But the rewards of farming don't come fast or easy. It's all about those rewards. And I'll just say as an aside, that's probably my single biggest aha moment that I had in the last 10 years while I was talking in public, when the words came out of my mouth with no premeditation. We're giving our money to people we don't know very well so they can invest in things they don't understand very well in places most of us will never visit. And so if I say to you, does that sound like the recipe for a healthy future? I don't think anybody's going to say yes. It's just what we do with our money because we don't know what else to do with it. And I hope these excerpts are moving all around from anecdote to theory to conversation. Some of it's more personal, so here's a little bit more personal section. I take from my bookshelf a small stack of books related to local food, including The Feeding Web by Joan Gussow, Rebuilding the Food Shed by Philip Ackerman Leist, The Town That Food Saved by Ben Hewitt, A Garlic Testament by Stanley Crawford, and Financing Our Food Shed by Carol Pepe Hewitt. I go to my finance section and take The Battle for the Soul of Capitalism by John Bogle, founder of Vanguard, if you don't know who that is. The End of Wall Street by Roger Lowenstein, The Ascent of Money by Neil Ferguson, The Ecology of Commerce by Paul Hawken, and The White Paper by Satoshi Nakamoto, the imputed developer of Bitcoin. All of these touch on, albeit often quite indirectly, the violence of the modern economy. Not the military-industrial violence of armed aggression or oppression, but the kind of harm done when you try to substitute transactions for relationships. Tattered social fabric, overtaxed natural systems, balance sheets out of whack from cheap profits, civility out of whack from cheap tweets, metabolisms out of whack from cheap calories. When I glance back at my bookcase, I notice Jihad versus McWorld by Benjamin Barber. That's a 1995 book. 1995. Jihad versus McWorld. And I realize once again, once again, for the umpteenth time, having forgotten or buried it umpteen times over the years, that what I find so meaningful, so beautiful about small organic farms and local food systems goes beyond agriculture, health, local economies, and climate change. What underpins all this for me, what feeds me as surely as mycorrhizal fungi collude with the root hairs of a beet, is the impulse to do less harm, the impulse towards conviviality and collaboration and radical neighborliness, the impulse towards something that is the opposite of both Jihad and McWorld. Responding to this impulse begins with healing the ills of distance, anonymity, and transience that have alienated us from our life source, food. What's more peaceable than getting to know a local organic farmer and giving her a 0% loan? Peace is as abundant as soil and as easily eroded. Blockchain technology is hard for most of us to understand, which is a particular drawback when one of the things we need in an increasingly Orwellian world is clarity and transparency. It seems odd that something celebrated for ushering in a new age of financial trust and peer-to-peer networking would be the progeny of, quote, a person or persons, unquote, whose identity is shrouded in secrecy. I'm so glad there were a few chuckles out there. Extreme financial speculation on the one hand, and irrationally exuberant techno-utopianism on the other plague Bitcoin, which is not entirely unlike the range of responses elicited by the prospect of Mars travel. We don't want the adventure of traveling to Mars to distract us from taking care of one another right here on Earth. We don't want the allure of cryptocurrency to distract us from the trust that is ours to build directly and locally. Now that we've demonstrated the sapience to head to Mars and to invent blockchain, we must also demonstrate the philia to invest our earthly inheritance with new levels of compassion, goodwill, and care. I'll see your Bitcoin, and I'll raise you Beatcoin. And you will see this artwork when you go to the website. A non-crypto, non-currency, impervious to speculation and techno-utopianism, and guaranteed to elicit affection. Online platforms for individual transactions democratize finance but do not readily address the systemic challenges of relocalization. Can we build a broad-based crowdfunding campaign to empower local food communities? Can we develop an online funding community that sees its purpose not as enabling individual transactions, but as feeding the local roots of systemic change? Don't hear anybody laughing at that. Okay, a couple more. And just for the fun, by the way, there's lots of pictures in the book of many of the farmers, and of course I can't get to any of the good pages now, of the farmers we're helping, of groups like this coming together to do it. Because I think we're both, sometimes people go, just show the pictures of the farmers. Well, no, it's about the farmers and it's about us. It's about all of us coming together. And no one should underestimate how meaningful it is to come together in groups like this. You know, it's very simple on the one hand, but then we all know it's not that simple in another way. It's very nuanced. How one understands the value of what local organic farmers are doing is the jumping off point for an exploration of nurture capital. It shapes our intention. If we view farmers as producers of commodities for global supply chains, we have one kind of financial intention. If we view farmers as stewards of soil fertility and producers of healthy food for our community, we have another kind of financial intention. This notebook and the slow money movement from which it springs, and the idea of nurture capital as a larger framework, and I did, again, such a crappy job of reading the title. It has 2 subtitles. That's my little thing I do. I can't help it. And the second subtitle is A Nurture Capitalist Notebook. So the theme of nurture capital is woven through here. So I'll read that sentence again. This notebook and the slow money movement from which it springs, and the idea of nurture capital as a larger framework are all explorations of intention. We are not just losing or building soil carbon. We are losing or building intention. Economic growth and fast money erode intention. Over and over again, I've seen the intention of social enterprises, also known as mission-driven companies, become diluted as ventures grow, as they dance with investors, as ownership changes, as founding visions are compromised by the imperatives of the marketplace, or get lost in a haze of entrepreneurial zeal, wealth creation, and absentee ownership. This is a story that has played itself out thousands of times, millions of times. It's a bit too much like salmon swimming out to the sea of absentee and public ownership, never to find their way back home. We talk of nutrient-dense food. Perhaps we should also talk about intention-dense entrepreneurship. A small diversified organic farm is the most intention-dense of enterprises. The idea that a whole new sector of finance could emerge to respect the intention density of small local businesses, starting with food and farming, is an idea worth mulling. Bill Donaldson, former chairman and CEO of the New York Stock Exchange, once said during a conversation, "A portfolio is a portfolio is a portfolio." However strong the intention to splice social and environmental mission into the investment decision-making of a professional portfolio manager, the arithmetic of financial risk and return governs. How do we steer money not only in a new direction, but in a way that allows us to hold intention? And finally, almost the last pages of the book. There's a couple of little things right after this, but this is kind of the climax of the book in the epilogue. 10,000 years ago, agriculture set us on the path towards urbanization, industrialization, and the geopolitics of nation states. 400 years ago, Europeans arrived on the shores of the New World and built the city of Providence, professing gratitude that the indigenous population was being wiped away as if by the hand of God. Quote. 250 years ago, our slave-holding founding fathers posited that all men are created equal. 100 years ago, you can see where this is going, can't you? 100 years ago, internal combustion and ammonium nitrate began conspiring to make Spam, TV dinners, Cocoa Puffs, Big Macs, and Twinkies. 50 years ago, millions of Americans marched in hundreds of cities and towns on the first Earth Day. 10 years ago, the words Deepwater Horizon and BP oil spill became synonymous with environmental disaster. 10 days ago, remember this was written last year, 10 days ago, the Cameron Peak Fire, Colorado's largest ever, was 92% contained at 208,913 acres or 326 square miles. 10 minutes ago, the Dow Jones Industrial Average was, in this case, 29,444. 10 minutes from now, someone is going to go to bitcoin.org and chip in $25. I wonder who it's going to, no, sorry. 10 years from now, Greta will be 27 years of age. Parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere will be, and what, pray tell, will be the percentage of soil organic carbon at SOIL Fire Farm? This is a story as small as a small farm, as brief as a decade, and as ripple-inducing as inklings of the transition from Homo sapiens to homophilia.